Hello out there to the 2 or 3 people who are actually going to watch this. This is Scalf and the Glutton. We're ready to do the post-mortem from Ludum Dare 45. And this year, the theme for Ludum Dare was Start With Nothing, which I think we could both agree was terrible.
Yeah, it was probably the worst theme out of the list that we didn't want.
Out of all the lists, it was absolutely the worst one, but that's no surprise. In addition to that, we did the Minijam 38. And not only did that push us to having to have our game ready by 1 a.m. on Monday morning, but it also added the additional constraint of the theme of food and only being able to use arrow keys as controls. So bearing those two things in mind, why don't you talk a little bit about what our actual idea was?
So when we first wanted to do the Ludum Dare, we discussed kind of doing something with cards and kind of wanted to go in that direction.
Sure.
And that kind of morphed into the idea of doing a dungeon delve where you're essentially building the dungeon out of different monsters or events or things like that, and then kind of just exploring through it. And then kind of thinking through that, we decided that it'd be kind of cool to have, we called them hollows, but they're essentially just giant holes in the ground where you're trying to fight your way through monsters to the bottom. So I guess in essence, it's a dungeon crawler with very limited options as you're going through different paths, which kind of got us to where we're at the end of it.
Yeah.
And kind of you can see here where we're trying to flesh out the ideas, and then starting here working on the layout on how to navigate. And you programmed that if you want.
Yeah, this is the part this is where I started in, was having the idea of you having a position being like the little red dot here, and having the 2 cards that you're standing above be the cards that you can actually go down into. And by doing that, you basically make all these branching choices as you move down the dungeon of what monsters you're going to fight or what relics you're going to pick up, etc., etc. So at this point, I'm just working through the code, which, by the way, most of the video that you're going to see, because I was the only one who recorded, is going to be my work on this process. So right now I'm working on the code to let you select a card and then to move to that card and to move on from there.
Yeah, I think originally when we had talked about doing the map, we were wanting to get a little bit more complex with how it works. So maybe like a path would be cut off along the way. But the problem kind of came down to time constraints, where we were saying, let's make this the easiest process as possible so we can get into actually building out the content and the systems of the game. And we went for like a 5x4 map all the way down.
Also, I had concerns about, a bad random gen giving you stuck on a wall or something like that, to where you had no way to move down. Or even worse, like you have a way to move down, but because of the way the random gen works, you're just doing one path linearly the entire time, and you have no choice in the matter of what you fight and all that kind of stuff. So here I am working on, so one of the first sort of disagreements that we had on this process was, Andrew had pictured this in his head as like, a card game almost exclusively with a minimalistic background. And so I said, like, I actually wanted to see more, something that looked like a dungeon, right? And so here I am basically making, a brick wall, around, making a room and to be the cards, so to speak, of what the stuff is actually going to be placed on.
Yeah, I think by the time we had gotten to this part, which we'll see it later on in the actual gameplay, I spent a good maybe 6 to 8 hours drawing really bad sprites that looked like food, but were actually monsters. So a lot of eyeballs and a lot of claws and oozing stuff going on.
Which, that is what the monsters in the game end up being.
Yeah.
I say we're starting working independently of each other right now, and I'm working more on what the actual dungeon's going to look like here. Apparently I can't figure out how to get that card the right size, or I don't care, one way or another. Come on, there it is. So we ended up using a combination of the 2 ideas that you can see here, with the dungeon background, looking like an actual room, but then the overlay on top of it that contains the information about what's in that dungeon that does look somewhat like a playing card. So I felt like it was a good marriage of the 2 styles here. And here I am importing some of Andrew's monsters as he discussed. What do you got there? Is that a...
Yeah, it's supposed to be a carrot snake.
A carrot snake,
yeah,
and a tomato.
It's tomato and then
a broccoli with a little eyeball on it.
Yeah, so I think the idea here was trying to make them look more abstract. And then as we kind of went along, like my wife pointed out, she was like, I didn't know that was a carrot unless you told me it was a carrot.
Right,
so,
that's the same thing my wife said.
Yeah, so we kind of went back to the drawing board on that and started actually making them look like the shape of the food, and then just throwing on monster-esque components onto it.
So here I am working on the player character, and you see my frustrations here about not being able to scale it up without it looking any better. But I took some inspiration, from other, like Atari looking games. So specifically, the Scott Pilgrim. It's got the Scott Pilgrim eyes going pretty hard on this guy. But all in all, I mean, you can't accuse me of not drawing this because that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, and I mean, kudos to you. You didn't even use a reference image as like a tracing thing, because I definitely took some pictures of real food to trace over. I have no artistic talent whatsoever. But no, you did an excellent job on that. And I think the art style, you can kind of see the differences where Kevin had built through some of these things, specifically the well in the background. I think. Do you have video?
I don't know if that's it. I can't remember if I had footage of that. I think that's one of those things that I tragically lost along the way. It just wasn't recording while I made the well. Yeah. But I think I do get in here in a minute into making the actual wasteland-looking background. But now you can see the player character making his way through the different rooms of the dungeon. So now all he's lacking really is a sufficiently bleak backdrop. Yeah. Which I think that's what I'm starting into here.
Yeah, and I think while you were working on this, I still unfortunately was working through sprites at this point and kind of coming up with the Relic System. And so I'll talk a little bit about that because we don't really have the footage where I'm working on it as we watch you draw this desolate wasteland here. Mm-hmm. So the relics were kind of supposed to interact with the combat, and at this point we still didn't discuss how combat was going to be handled. So a lot of the relics were going to be just mitigating health and mitigating damage, and maybe looking towards things in terms of navigation and inventory space and stuff like that. And so unbeknownst to me, like, we have technical limitations. Like I think you said the camera was zoomed out as far as possible.
We could honestly have made that better. All I would have had to done was to tile this backdrop to where we could effectively zoom out a little better. But because of the aspect ratio that I drew this at, like, we would have had to done, because I didn't make this tileable in any way, we'd have had to done some more background art, and I think at the point that we discussed it, I didn't feel like doing it. Yeah. So there's the outline for the well. Oh, and then the well just magically appeared because I missed a bunch of footage, Yeah. But now I'm working on so one of the big concepts here is that you have a pool of lives, so to speak, that are human lives, like your actual villager, the other villagers, the other members of your group, who are there to support you, and they're also there to take your place when you die. Yep. So when you die, one of these guys has to take your place as the new dungeon diver. Here I am working on some audio. I think I was recording like the sounds of wet smacks or chimes or something like that. Which, by the way, the little chimes that happen here, as you successfully save your villagers, was two little click-clack rolly balls, like from the 80s, that you just go ching, 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 and I just isolated out the little...
Did not know that.
But see, so as you come back from the dungeon, you rally up, you tot up a certain amount of food as you kill monsters. And so if you start out with 10 villagers, and if you don't come back with 10 food, then X amount of people are going to die because they're going to starve to death. And so, like, when you come back from the dungeon, you have to feed everybody or they die. Now, here's another point of conflict, was the combat. Yeah. You wanted it to just be like when you take the card, a certain amount of math happens instantaneously, yep. And you can predict easily, what the outcome of that combat is.
I essentially just wanted to take the mental gymnastics out of it, because at the end of the day, it should have been about, or from my perspective, it should have been about finding the best path that met with what you wanted to accomplish, and just a quick resolve and kind of work down. Because originally the idea was to be a very minimalistic game, something that we didn't have to spend a lot of time artistically on, and we could focus on core mechanics. But as you pointed out, and as I agree with, it didn't actually feel like you were fighting with anything. Yeah. And so we kind of added in this layer here.
I wanted to add a little more feedback, a little more weight, to the combat, because you ever played that board game where you put together the tiles and you run from zombies, where you kill a zombie by rolling a 4, 5, or 6?
That game is actually called Zombies.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. But rolling a 4, 5, or 6 doesn't seem like a very fun way to kill a zombie to me. And so, like, just saying, like, I'm pushing down and this thing's dead to me, like, I wanted a bit more than that. And oddly enough, one of the biggest complaints we've gotten about this game so far stems from that combat. It's not the combat in and of itself, it's the sound effect.
Yeah.
The people are like, the pop, 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 pop. They hate that.
Yeah, it brings back flashbacks to Vietnam, you know?
Yeah. You know, that was the little, I recorded a sound of a wet sock on my arm being smacked. Like, and it originally sounded wetter than that and a little grosser, but I think I compressed it to death to where now it just sounds like somebody flicking you in the ear, you know, repeatedly. And so people complained about that. Here's the super dark ending. You probably can't read it right now, but it says, "Your people are dead, but if no one remembers them, did they ever really live?"
Yeah. That's a little dark. It's a little too dark.
So here we are on an actual run through of the finished game. I'm making my way down through the dungeon here, and this is sped up like to double speed because it actually takes like probably about 10 or 15 minutes to complete this game, something like that.
Yeah, and I'd say most of it is one, you're kind of remembering where those runes are at.
Yeah.
Because by the end of it, we cut out maybe 30 or 40 runes that I'd planned.
Yep.
And stuck with a base 15, and then we just doubled the spawn rate of those.
Yeah, and see, only being able to access the 2 slots below you means that it's very easy to have runes on the other side of the thing that are impossible for you to get. And like right now, I made my way back to a rune that I could not get on the first run, necessitating multiple runs through this thing to complete the game, you know, and to do it in the most optimum way possible. Like, you know, if you're a speedrunner on this thing, you know, you'd somehow have to rely on a certain amount of RNG to get you a good layout of these, because without these relics, it's not possible to clear the lower levels of this thing. You just don't have the health and damage to sustain through the fights.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was what we wanted to accomplish. Like, I think the final tier, I mean, the theming here seems pretty obvious. You know, we're going through the different food groups. From the old antiquated food guide pyramid here. And when you got down to the sugars part of the pyramid, like literally anything would kill you unless you had a rune with you of some type. And that was kind of to progress so they're not just going down the same path and it would make them diversify. And the runes, essentially, the red ones have you deal extra damage. You know, the green ones give you extra life, and the blue ones help mitigate damage from the enemy. So it's a very simple concept. And here we have the picture of the inventory system where you can kind of go around and pick what you want. And your inventory was restricted to 12. And we wanted to do more features with the inventory where you had to balance between taking runes and getting food for your people. And you get the food from beating monsters, so it forces you to fight as well.
The main problem, the reason why I resisted doing anything with that was because of this terrible limitation of only using arrow keys. So anything that you do in the menu is super cumbersome, and trying to navigate the idea of I want to pick this stuff up and I want to drop this other stuff is going to be miserable if you know, if you had to do it with the arrow keys.
Yep. No, that's fair. And I think another big problem that we got to where we didn't get as many features as we wanted is that Unity thought it was awesome to drop huge blocks of code numerous times. I think we lost maybe a combined total of like 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah, pretty much all of Monday was fixing code that was missing that shouldn't have been.
Yeah.
And the lesson there to anybody listening is if you're about to do a game jam, we were using 2019 beta 6.
Yeah, like the bleeding edge of what was available.
Don't use the beta, use the stable release. I can't swear that was the cause of our issues, but I have no other explanation.
Yeah, and we've collaborated on other projects before and never ran into that, even working on the same blocks of code together. And it wasn't even a case of, you know, here's a merge conflict, how do you want to resolve it, and us just picking something randomly. But no, I think overall, I'm pretty happy with the end result of this.
Same.
I think compared to our first one.
Compared to our last game, it looks better, it plays better. It's better in pretty much every single way, and I think it's going to be received better.
Yeah.
So yeah, here we are. You found the seed at the end of the dungeon, and you saved your people. It's a nice happy ending.
Yeah.
Something to make people a little bit less upset with all the horrible darkness.
Yeah, and
the rest of the game.
We talked a little bit about the story briefly through this. But I guess the main premise, if you want to read the full story, it's obviously on the submission page. But the general premise was that you've kind of moved through the civilizations, and you're now at a stage where the only source of food are these hollows in the ground, which are basically just a fancy word for like a bunker or a well or something. And you don't know why they were set up or how they were set up. You just know that that's where you guys can get food. And as you exhaust the food source, you have to kind of navigate out on your own to find more. And kind of the secret we wanted to have there is at the bottom there's seeds to have a renewable source of non-sentient food that's going to attack you. And again, the limitation of the food theme from the Minijam kind of put us into that position where the food is sentient. But I liked it. It was a good marriage of the two. So.
Well, anyway, to wrap it up, I'm again super pleased with the effort this time. I do say in future jams, I want to put in, like we tried to say that we were going to put in less work this time, but it didn't really pan out that way. I think at this point, our wives need to have a post-mortem talking about how much they hate us and Ludum Dare after this whole thing. Yeah. But for now, that's it for Scalfing the Glutton, and we'll see you guys next Ludum Dare.